Now again, we're going to dive into Isaiah again, one of the more famous messianic passages in the book. Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7, and hopefully supply a little bit of context there too.
Okay. It reads, "For there has been a child born to us, there has been a son given to us, and the princely rule will come to be upon his shoulder. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. To the abundance of the princely rule and to the peace there will be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom."
First thing we should notice is if you look back to the beginning of chapter 9, it starts off with a geographical reference. It says this, "For there will be no more gloom for her who was in anguish, that in earlier times he treated the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali with contempt, but later on he shall make it glorious. By the way of the sea, on the other side of the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles." So this chapter would be noteworthy if only for this, namely that at the beginning of it is the only Old Testament reference to Galilee, and we know where Jesus' ministry starts. So by the time we get to verses 6 and 7, we're not too surprised that we've now jumped over centuries. In history, we know these are centuries apart, but in the context, you don't. So these marvelous prophecies, some of which are still a little puzzling to Christians. For instance, the reference to Mighty God, Eternal Father causes dissension among Christians today. But we know those parts because they're embedded permanently in, let's say, Handel's Messiah. So we get that part of who Jesus is emphatically even in the old churches. But there are parts of this we should pay more attention to if we're ex-Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, it uses the term princely rule being upon his shoulders, and then it says throne of David and upon his kingdom at the end. So those phrases certainly tie you to the earth, to an earthly kingdom. The throne of David, the promise, we remember the promise given to David about God giving him a house that would last forever.
His family.
Yeah.
His descendants, his physical descendants sitting on a throne in a city, Jerusalem, perpetually.
So we like to think of Jesus as the direct descendant of David. That part we're fine with. But the idea of him having a kingdom on the earth is resisted
Christians,
by a lot of people.
we divide over this. But we need to realize in the context again of the original, this had to do with an earthly throne, not a Messiah in heaven. And that when we think of Jesus coming back again, what we call the parousia, we shouldn't really call it the second coming, it's the first parousia. It's his royal presence. When we think of him coming back again, we remember that most of the time when Jesus is talking about his coming again, he's talking about himself as the Son of Man.
Yeah.
And what a lot of witnesses don't know, and certainly ex-witnesses might not know either, is that Son of Man is chosen deliberately by Jesus to connect him to these promises from the Old Testament. Son of Man in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, for instance. The Messiah will be a man. What the Jews didn't know is that he was also going to be God, the Son of God. So therefore, the human aspect of him we need to play up and think about a lot more, because he's not only the Son of Man, he's still the Son of David.
Yes. And I think we talked about the fact that being the Son of David, that earthly comment about the physicalness of Jesus is one of the reasons that Christians believe in the resurrection, being physical.
The physical body of Jesus, in continuity with the body that was laid in the grave.
Yes, he's
not a new body.
He's not just the Son of God, he's the Son of Man, and he's specifically the Son of David.
So when we're dealing with a text like this, we should never neglect even those tiniest details, because they can often be very telling as to how we understand the second coming, because almost all of the cults have some deviation from traditional doctrine about the second coming. Seventh-day Adventists, for instance, are kind of in the same zone as the witnesses on this, that they believe that somehow Christ revisited the earth in 1844, and that he did some supernatural work that was invisible to men, and that sets the gospel of the Seventh-day Adventists apart from the Jehovah's Witnesses doctrine. But it's a similar concept, that Christ did something invisibly in heaven. An invisible presence, as it were.
It's hard to fight invisibility.
It's hard to argue with invisibility.
Yes.
So in the next segment, we'll talk about
Isaiah chapters 11 and 12.